All right. Well, I'm going to go on to the next talk, and that's our problems of adoption, and we'll expound more on what I see as the problem in the U.S. This was a picture of Christian and I, and actually there's Atmar and a few other folks that were there during that time. But in any case, you've been using the artificial disc before anybody back in the early 1980s, Terry Marnay and Karen Buettner-Johns. And we did our first implant in March of 2000. So it's been 12 years, over 12 years, 12 and a half years. And we still have the insurance companies saying that this is experimental, we can't pay for it. And we're saying, experimental, what data are you looking at? I mean, are you looking at the most recent data, or are you looking at data from 2000? So we have the reluctance of the insurance companies to reimburse for this for various reasons, and then surgeons to accept this as a treatment option. And we'll talk more about why that's so important. And then we have the slowdown by the FDA. I mean, the FDA has just put their brakes on, and whether or not it's related to the downturn of our economy from 2008, whether it's related to the FDA getting burned from the cardiac stents, and they are so cautious because of the big recall there with the eluting stents. But anyway, there's been a big change there, and for the worse. So in the U.S., we do use access surgeons. I know that all of you here do your own approach. So the problem that we have with the adoption for the surgeons is that they need to go to access surgeon, and they don't like splitting the fee. So we have the insurance denial, which is a big thing. And the fact of the matter is that if you are a U.S. surgeon and a patient has Aetna, you will get paid about $1,000 to do an artificial disc, which, is still good money. But if you did a fusion, you might get paid 4 times, or depending on the kind of fusion, you might get paid tenfold. So it's really hard if you're on the fence, if you're really not a believer in disc replacement, and I see you and I say, okay, I think you're an ideal candidate for disc replacement, but your insurance company's probably not going to pay for it, or, you know what, it's relatively new technology and not a lot of really good data out there. So then you tell the patient to have a fusion. So, Chris, that's why that, I believe that the feeling is that in the U.S. we're not doing them. I mean, it is still, something that a lot of us really believe in, and I think the data is very good that still do. But if you can imagine you're a guy out there and you're struggling along and you can make X versus 4X or 5X, it's got to factor into your decision making. And not all these folks out there are really in it for the science like a lot of us are, but that's just the way it is. And in general, anytime anything new comes about, people are always, this is not a great technology. But this is not so new. This is 12 and a half years old. So we have over a 20-year track record. We have many RCTs we've talked about. We have approval for a couple of the discs, and we have multiple cost studies finding that it's the same or cheaper, and we'll go into that in more detail. So here's the story. There has to be some other mystical or other yet-to-be-defined criteria why we would approve this. So it's like trying to hit a moving target. As I said, from the time we start a U.S. study to the time of approval, it used to be about 5 to 6 years. Now we're seeing it's almost 8 years. In the Kineflex study, it's almost 8 years, which is crazy. And if you're a company that is supporting this project, you get to the point where you say, is our return on the dollar really there? I mean, years ago, for example, Helmut Link sold the Charité lumbar only for $500 million to DePuy. Synthes, not Synthes, but the Prodisc was sold to Synthes for almost $400 million, 350 or 60. Stryker bought the Flexicor cervical and lumbar for about 300 some million. Those prices, nobody's paying that anymore because the market, they're saying it because of insurance, just isn't there. So obviously the ground rules concerning the reimbursement and the approval for this has changed drastically. It used to be that you do your randomized prospective controlled trial and you get your minimum 2-year follow-up and you get approval. And if you got the FDA approval, then usually the insurance would approve it. So now what they're saying is that, well, we want 5-year data. And now recently, as I see patients come back from these various studies, I ask the clinical research people, I say, okay, how much longer does the patient have to come back now? Because the patients, they're coming back every year, and I like seeing them because I get to see if there's any issues and problems. But now it's 7 years. And now we are getting the feeling that the FDA is going to require 10-year follow-up, which is not such a bad thing, but it is a bad thing in terms of trying to get insurance to reimburse. So we have the original data from Europe, and you can say that or complain about Lemaire and David studies saying that, oh, the outcome studies or the self-reported outcomes are not what we have today. What's true? But it's really still pretty good data that they had. And now we have quality and cost model showing the cost of the prosthesis or doing that surgery compared to fusion. So it's like, okay, where's the reimbursement go next? And it's really the insurance companies that are keeping the lid down. It's not the surgeons. If the insurance company said they would pay for it, then surgeons would do it. So if we look at the evidence, and here is, this was one of the original Charité. It looked like the bottle cap. And this was an 18-year follow-up. I don't know if he is still alive or still around, but not bad for a poorly designed prosthesis, but that was never commercially available. So we have many European trials that had greater than 10-year follow-up. We have all the U.S. IDE trials, and the results are consistent across all the studies. And this was from Philip Lemaire's. And, again, the good to excellent, what does that really mean? Is that really the same thing as our VAS, the Oswestries, all the things we do today? No, of course not. But it's still data, and it's still something we can learn from. And he had very good follow-up. And Terry David, again, had, again, very good follow-up of his patients with a minimum of 10 years, and they went out to 16 years, and they were very good. And I realize that there's been a study out that from Putier, I believe, that showed that at 10 years or whatever, that 17 years, whatever it was, that these patients go on to fuse. Well, that's one study, and that's not the vast majority. That's one. And here's all the IDE trials that have been done of the various artificial discs. So as Svante said, there's not a paucity of data. It's just a matter of whether or not our insurance companies read them and they have their tech evaluations. And it's frustrating because they do the reviews every couple of years. They don't look at the massive data that's out there. And, we have our U.S. data. That really is very, very good. And basically, if the patient is well at 3 months, they continue to do well up to 5 years. Next stop is 7 years. We'll look at the 7-year data and see if there's any degradation. But that's not been our experience. We're not seeing these things fall apart. Even the Charité, which I think is not a great design, these are not falling apart as I look at some of my patients that are now 10 years out. And if we look at the revision and additional surgery, and then there's a lot of data. Some of this is good data. Some of it is not, very good data, level 3, 4, and 5. But if we look at some of the often quoted data, we have the Giselli and Gillette papers that show if you had a fusion, there's a high percent of reoperation rate. And this is very consistent with the cervical data that shows by Hildebrand that showed that there's a 2.9% per year of adjacent segment disease, or at 10 years it's 29% and so forth. So the lumbar spine looks like it does the same thing. Whereas if we look in the disc replacement and look at the follow-up here, the adjacent level is looking like it's about half to about a quarter of that coming from the disc replacement. And the PRODIS data is the first one that objectively shows it rather than in a non-controlled trial. The PRODIS shows that it is about 3 to 4-fold changes at the adjacent level for a fusion. So what about the cost studies? And we'll talk about this more, but there's been a number of studies, and none of these studies show that the TDR is more expensive. The only one was a study that I did in which the comparator was against an anterior body fusion with allograft bone and autograft filling it. That was the only one in which the disc replacement was more expensive than. But not many people are using allograft bone and their iliac crest anymore. Patients, at least in the U.S., don't like that. They don't want to have a bone graft. So again, it is cheaper than doing that, and you think that it would make the insurance companies happy. So we have strong data, for the disc replacement. We talked about it. The TDR is similar in cost to fusion or less expensive, and there's no study that says that the TDR is more expensive. So you'd think, Why wouldn't the insurance companies want that? And it's the FDA approval process that's killing our new technology adoption. And I'm glad that I came here for the meeting. I mean, I see some new designs of the Pro Disc and some of the other things that we just don't see in the U.S. And here, I would like to think that, we are ahead of the curve in terms of new technology, but we're really not. A lot of the U.S. companies are coming here to Europe, and they are selling in Europe because it's much easier to get the CE mark. A case in point is the M6. M6 is sold 17,000 or almost 18,000 implants. We haven't even begun the study in the U.S., have not even begun to use it. So the length of time for approval is just unprecedented. Insurance is also killing our adoption. And again, if you go back to what you get paid as a surgeon, but I mean, I truly believe in the technology, and I'm willing to take the lower reimbursement because I think that this is better for our patients in the long run. So it's a simple choice. What would I want on my back? Do I want the picture on the right with the fusion, with the little hypermobility at the level above, or do I want an artificial disc at the bottom? For me, it's a no-brainer. If it was my family, it'd be a no-brainer. But anyway, that's where we are in the U.S. Thank you.